son will probably spend just a few days in the NICU, may have to have some help with oxygen, but his lungs look great, everything looks great. Okay, we have our son on a Sunday night at 1 a.m. And that next morning I go up to see him. He said, "You can't see him." He said, "We're cleaning out the tubes from the oxygen." And I said, "Okay, just come back in a little bit." Well, then two doctors come down to our room and they say, "Hey, we lied before. We were actually inserting the first chest tube into your son's lungs collapsed." And so I'm like, "All right, what are you saying?" Well, they kept collapsing. He had 4 chest tubes at one time that weighed 3 pounds. He was diagnosed with pulmonary interstitial emphysema, so he had tiny air sacs over both lungs. His lungs couldn't heal, so they just kept collapsing. And the doctors at that point literally said to us, they said, "We're incredibly frustrated. We've never seen anything like this." They had 2 babies prior to. Both babies died. Both of those babies just had 2 chest tubes. Liam had 4, 8 total. And so we're kind of sitting there. He couldn't get oxygenated blood to his other organs, and so we were now concerned whether his organs would shut down. They had to remove every single child that would cry because any outside stimuli would be detrimental to our son's health. And we're staying in the Ronald McDonald house, and all this stuff is going on. And a lady came by. She worked there. She put her arm around me. My wife's in the room. Puts her arm around me, and she said, "You know," she said, "the hardest thing about all this is that it may not be God's will to heal your baby." I was like, I pray to God that my wife didn't just hear that. And she did. So I walk into the room. Sarah, I can tell her eyes are just ready to break. And she said, "I heard what she said." And she said, "I did this. I did this. This is because of my past. And God's punishing us and punishing me. And I am so sorry." And she starts just breaking. And I said, "Baby, this is not how God works." And we use these kind of moral platitudes to just kind of throw on God. And yet, who's behind this? Satan. We've got a real enemy, and we live in a broken world. And I'm not here to talk about necessarily theodicy, okay? What I'm here to talk about is the fact of the matter is people have an understanding, and they throw these moral platitudes out like Job's wife would do, and to say, you have every right to question God based on your integrity. Because her understanding was God should not mess with us because you're an upstanding man. And the fact of the matter is, we have this world, and God's about to unleash on Job in a way to say, "Young man, gird up your loins because you have no knowledge of what you're trying to speak into." And the fact of the matter is, and we don't have time for it, that if you read Job 38 through Job 42, and I encourage you to do it, what God is pointing out is he points literally to every aspect of his creation. And he says that I create with this beautiful, wild freedom. And when he says that, what we have to understand is this thing that we understand freedom, and some take it a lot further than others, that sometimes we find ourselves within the vortex of this thing that we know to be free choice, and we find ourselves in this vortex where all kinds of hell is unleashed. And sometimes the innocent bystander of that is my son, is someone that you know and love, and guess what? We play a part of that sum total of evil too. Because we're an imperfect group of people. But to start throwing labels on God, and this is who God is, and this is how he works, we need to understand who he is and who we're committed to. Because here's the thing, I have a buddy in Houston that is a pastor at a Methodist church, and he was around the table and he had some Muslim clerics, and one of the Muslim cleric, and he was kind of the man, you know, among his Muslim brothers. And so he looks at my buddy Jacob and he says to him, he said, you know the difference between you and I? And Jacob said, what? He said, the difference between you and I is, he said, my God doesn't bleed. And Jacob called me and said, he's exactly right. We have a God who suffers. We know him to be Emmanuel, God with us. And so for my wife, there's a text, Isaiah 65. It says, in the new heaven, new earth, no longer will an infant only live but a few days. Infants dying isn't anything new. If it was rolling off the lips of Isaiah, what he was saying is, I know who God is, I see this, and here's what I know, God wins. And so when I sit there and I think about it, and that was the text that we held on to every single day, that in the end, if our son is taken, he will rise from the dead. And so Job sits in this moment, and God says that thing of, I will interrogate you, young man. And it really is for the benefit of Job, because he has no idea who he's committed to. And so God unleashes kind of this. I love what one writer says. They call chapters 38 through 42 God's divine creation album. Like it's his portrait of creation. Like, here, look at this. Here, look at this. Here, look at this. Did you know this? Did you know this? Where were you when I was doing this? Where were you when I'm doing this? Wait, you know, and he goes through this, and if you read those chapters, it is just this beautiful, beautiful freedom. Well, what do we know about Job? Job wasn't free. Job was committed to God in such a way that if I do anything wrong, it's going to tick you off, and then bad things happen. And so what we do is we chase after God in such a way that we're actually chasing after the experience. Because we want the experience. Our kids are being raised. Our students are being... I've done high school ministry for 15 years. I've been working with university students now for a while. And what I know and understand is much of the programming is trying to create an experience to where your child, where that son or daughter, where you yourself once landed, and you held on to that experience, and then you went to another experience and another experience, and all of a sudden what you find is you're addicted to the experience. And so what we have is we have a lot of high school students, a lot of university students, a lot of people that may be around these tables tonight, that we are addicted to the experience, that we are experience rich and relationally poor. Because we're addicted to the experience. We have a bad experience, and all of a sudden God gets the blame. We don't want to talk about evil in this world. We don't want to talk about there's a real enemy. We don't want to talk about, you know, the freedom that people exhibit sometimes, and sometimes we are the innocent bystander. And yet we put these things onto God, and we chase after experience as if God is an experience that just happens once. And so when you talk about sexual temptation or desire, it's no different. Because we long for the sexual experience. We want to be so in that we don't have to commit to being with. And my wife said, do you really mean what you're saying literally? And I literally mean what I said. Sexual temptation is this idea that I can be in without this profound with you. We do that, and so we run from one experience to the next. That's why people wonder, why do we have such an issue with cohabitation? Because here's the thing. A number of students, what they're seeing modeled with many, many families is a contractual-based marriage. That the contract begins, and I talked about this last week, that we come in with these guarantees, and it's always like, well, if the grass is greener on the other side, I'll go to that. And we have such this self-absorbing desire that we step into marriages or commitments, and our first question is, how does this work for me? And if it's not working for us anymore, if I'm not satisfied, then we bail. And better yet, we have a lot of parents that say, hey, when my kids graduate, because our successful marriage is based on whether my kids, that I'm here for my kids and I'm taking them from one event, one experience to the next experience. But when they graduate, me and you are separated. And it's like we wonder why so many, I get it all the time. Chad, why are so many of you college students living together? Why do they want to live together? Why do they not want to, why are they getting married older? I'm like, because we don't have a healthy model. They're coming in as if this earthquake is happening. They're stepping into the building that we know to be marriage, and they're saying, I don't trust this building anymore. So I'm going to go cohabitate with somebody. I'm going to live with somebody because guess what? There's no commitment there. I can actually get what I want and not be committed. And so we do this, and we start falling into this, and what I begin to understand, this is not a message about cohabitation and all this stuff. This is a message, though, we got a lot of people cohabitating with God and refusing to be married to Him. And so when I think about that, it's like we are addicted to the experience. And when you think about God, is He just doesn't work that way. That's the difference between a covenant and a contract. A contract says it is all about me and my self-gratification. That a covenant transcends this idea of self-gratification and said it is all about binding me to the other. We need to move from a contractual-based society to a covenantal-based society. That I'm consistent. That I'm with you through heaven and hell. And if you read the scriptures, two of the images of God, one is a father and the other one is a faithful husband. And guess what? His bride is about as faithless as you can get. And God is absolutely binded to this bride. And thank God He is. Because we represent this bride. And so when you talk about this covenant, your first question is this to yourself. Man, are my commitments, do they reflect covenant or do they reflect more of a contract? We got coaches that'll sign a 10-year extension and they'll leave after the first year. What do you think? Why do you think these young guys are going into pro sports and saying, I want $50 million guaranteed? And it's like the coaches are never held responsible, but for some odd reason the student athlete is. I'm not making an argument here. What I'm trying to say is what we are seeing modeled day after day is this contractual-based society. And we as the people of God have to start modeling covenantal relationship. That I'm binded to you, whoever you is. And so it's a large part, it's about knowing Him versus knowing about Him. You can know a lot of facts, but the bottom line at the end of the day, if you don't know Him, it's going to shift everything for you. I want you to turn to Job 42. Job 42. We're going to kind of breeze through this because I want to get you plenty of time. Job 42, verse 5, God's given His response. I love what Job says in Job 42, verse 5. If you put any verse to memory, put this one. My ears have heard about you, but now my eyes have seen you. I've heard everything about you, but now my eyes have seen you. Notice the next verse. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Now, I want to be careful here because the translation honestly is off. The Hebrew there can be translated in the negative or the positive. Job has just said, my ears have heard about you, but now my eyes have seen you. The actual translation can be translated this way, that I recant, and I change my mind, and I now take comfort in dust and ashes. I'm just saying, notice what Job does. Remember what I said. You will break down. It is a biological thing. Job at this point has broken down.